All right, I believe we are live. Welcome, everyone. I just want to do a quick check. I am trying some new tech out here to be able to go live on this workshop here. So if you could just give me a thumbs up and let me know whether we're actually live here or not before I get started. Please let me know if you're hearing anything that I'm saying here and if I'm coming through. All right, let's just double check and see if it is all working out for us. Welcome, everyone. Come on in, come on in. All right, I will keep an eye on the chat over here on the side. I'm looking at the comments. And you're all right, I'm getting some thumbs up. We can hear you. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for letting me know. We're getting some comments coming in from YouTube. I am multi-streaming here. We're on YouTube, but the majority of the folks are going to be joining us from LinkedIn. And I am trying out some new tech here, so bear with me if I happen to stumble through any of this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and we will get started in just a minute here. Let me just make sure I've got this set up. So it looks like, I hope that I am just going to quickly test that out to make sure I am seeing the right thing here and that the other folks are able to see my screen instead of just me. And it looks like we are here. All right, thank you. Thank you, welcome everyone, welcome. As we're waiting for the folks to stream in here, you can let me know where you're coming in from. I'm in beautiful Buenos Aires, Argentina right now. I'm originally from Toronto, but I'm in Buenos Aires as part of my sabbatical. So I'm coming to you live from Argentina. All right, welcome everyone. All right, and it looks like we are all here, and I just want to make sure everybody can see the slides that are up on the screen right now. Are we all good with that? We have some folks chiming in from LinkedIn here. And am I sharing my screen? Oh, it looks like I'm not sharing my screen here. Got that. And now I believe you should be able to see my screen. All right, great. Sorry for the stumbling there. Again, using some new tech here. So this is my very first go live on LinkedIn. I've gone live many, many times inside of our community using the tech that's available as part of our platform, but this is some new tech. So no slides. Welcome, Kingsley. I'm glad you were able to make it. Let me know if you can see the slides now. If some folks are saying no slides. We got some folks coming in from India. Welcome, everybody. All right, great. It looks like the slides are now showing. Technical issues out of the way. I'm going to get started and I'm going to dive right into the subject matter here to make sure that I can get through all of the materials. And I'm going to make sure that I leave a little bit of time at the end of this workshop here for questions if anybody has any. I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of questions based on the feedback that I get inside of our community when we do our live sessions. There's usually a ton of questions, so I'll make sure I reserve about 15 minutes for all of that. All right. Welcome, everyone. If you do have questions, you can start to put them into the comment section now, and I'll scroll back up at the end, and I'll start to go from top to bottom and answer your questions. All right, great. Thank you, Kingsley, for letting me know. We got some folks coming in from Italy, folks coming in from Dubai, all over the globe. Again, I'm coming in from Buenos Aires, beautiful Buenos Aires, as I like to call it, in Argentina. I'm very glad that everybody's here. Let's dive into the subject matter at hand. And that subject matter today is going to be about the use of frameworks and what frameworks actually are and what they can do for you as a business analyst. And my objective in this workshop is to give you an understanding of a type of business analyst and a way of operating as a business analyst that may be very different than what you're used to, right? Some of the more senior folks in our audience here probably are going to understand a lot of what I'm talking about here, and hopefully will share my opinions on the subject. For some of you folks that are not as senior, the objective here is to give you a view into the mind of a more senior analyst so that you can start to understand some of the thinking patterns that business analysts have, more senior business analysts have, that allow them to really perform at a much higher level. All right. And so in the agenda today, I'm going to really quickly walk you through what a framework actually is and just what frameworks are in general. And then we're going to dive into the P3 framework, which is the framework that I've assembled for the courses that I teach. And then I'll share some thoughts if there's some time left about how the subject should actually be taught. But really, I want us to focus a lot more on the P3 framework so you can get an idea of how more advanced analysts or more senior analysts tend to think about their work and how they produce more. If you don't know too much about who I am, you're completely new. Some of you folks I already recognize from our community, so you already know me. But for those of you who don't, feel free to just open up my profile, my LinkedIn profile in a different tab, and you can see all the experience that I've gone through. I won't walk through all of the details. You can kind of see the summary there, but just feel free to even connect with me if you want on LinkedIn or follow me if we're too far apart. But the summary of my experience essentially is that I've been a business analyst since 2005, and that's basically all I've done my entire career. I've kind of reached a point in my career where I've decided that the next stage in my career development is to actually teach. And that's a big part of the reason why I'm here standing in front of you today. All right, so quick summary. Click on my profile and you'll learn a lot more. As part of what we're going to be doing today, so one of the very first things I'm going to do before I even jump into all the subjects is that I want to kind of give you an idea of what frameworks are. And in this session, I'm going to be introducing you to 3 different analysts and their ways of thinking so that you can try to have some, a face that you can kind of put your own experience towards, right? I want you to have an analyst where you can kind of understand how the analyst thinks, and then you kind of estimate whether you're closer to a Justin, the junior business analyst, whether you're a little bit closer to Ingrid, the intermediate analyst, or Shauna, the senior analyst, right? So you're going to be meeting these folks today. And I also have another video at the end that I'll share with you where you can actually get to know them a little bit more, all right? So we'll get into that in a minute, but let's talk a little bit about what frameworks are. So the term framework gets thrown out quite a bit out there, and it can get a little bit convoluted. It seems like an advanced term, but the way that you should really just understand what a framework is as a way of thinking, right? Simply, that is all you need to know about frameworks, right? Framework is essentially a way of thinking, and it's a way of thinking that you can adopt that will help you to kind of understand the world around you, all right? And as a junior analyst, one of the most difficult things is for somebody to really kind of orient themselves, and frameworks will help more junior analysts form a way of thinking that helps them very quickly understand what kind of situation that they're in. Because the next thing that a framework helps you do is that it helps you make very good decisions about the type of things that you are going to be working on. Okay, and if that doesn't make sense to you, the example in a couple of minutes will. Now, for a framework to actually be effective, for a framework to actually work, really 2 conditions really need to be met. Number one is that you got to make sure that the framework that you're investing your time and effort into is at the right level of complexity. There are a lot of things out there that will teach you how to think, but it's usually not at the level of detail that an analyst needs to make real good, clear decisions, right? Things tend to be very general and overly simplistic. That's one set of frameworks that exists out there in the BA space. And then there are another set of frameworks that are just way too complex. So getting the level of complexity right in a framework is integral, because a framework that's too complex, people are not going to be able to learn, but a framework that's too simple isn't going to help you prepare yourself for the reality that you have to deal with in your day-to-day life as a business analyst. Second condition is that, and this is the hard part, right? It's one thing for me to put up a slide in front of you and show you a framework. It's a completely different thing for you to be able to internalize that framework. And when I say internalize, what I mean isn't just that you've memorized the framework. In the internalization process is something that can take years for you to get it right, right? And I'd love to be able to stand here in front of you and tell you that what I'm about to show you, you can learn overnight or you can learn it in a couple of weeks. But as a practitioner, I know much better, right? I know I've gone through this process myself throughout my own career, and I know that to truly learn how to think in a way that makes you effective can take years sometimes, because it requires a lot of repeated process. And so when I say that you have to be able to internalize this way of thinking, what I mean is that you understand it at a level where it starts to show up in your actions and in your decisions unconsciously, right? And we'll see an example with Shauna. When I show you an example of how Shauna thinks, you'll see a very clear example of exactly what I mean by internalization. Because out of the three folks that we looked at here, a little bit here, Shauna is the analyst who's completely internalized this framework, and that's why she's able to perform at the level that she's able to, whereas Justin, the junior analyst, is really kind of struggling on that front, all right? So those are the conditions, and that's essentially what a framework is. Now, for us to actually get a real clear idea of the value of a framework, let's take a look at an example of how the three analysts that we just met would answer the question, right? And it's a very basic question. What is your job as a business analyst? And this question gets asked a lot and it gets answered a lot in our profession. But I think everybody kind of comes to this question with a lot of their history, their own specific experiences, and they say, no, my job as an analyst is X, or my job as an analyst is Y. Let's look at how Justin, the junior analyst, would answer that question, right? If I was to ask Justin, or somebody like a Justin might come to me and say, my job is really to just write down what the customer is asking me for. I help them kind of clarify their ask a little bit. I document it, and I basically give that to the IT group so that they can do what they need to do, right? And Justin, as a junior analyst, kind of has to see the profession in that way, because they haven't been spent enough time in the profession to be able to elevate themselves to a level where they can see a little bit more broadly than that. And if I ask a junior analyst about what their job is and I hear that, I say, you know what, that's a legitimate answer. It's a very legitimate answer for somebody who has, let's say, less than 3 years of experience, which is essentially Justin, our junior business analyst. If I was to ask that same question of Ingrid, the intermediate analyst, and let me make sure that you can kind of see the slides here, so I'll see if I can shift this a little bit. If I was to ask that question of Ingrid, the intermediate analyst, I might hear an answer like this, all right? And that answer may be that Ingrid might describe her job as making sure that she can get the customers to agree on the product requirements, and then to detail them out for the development and the QA groups, right? And you see that the answers between what Justin is saying and what Ingrid is saying differ in quite significant ways, right? Justin is talking about a customer ask, and typically at a junior level, Justin is probably just dealing with one customer at a time, because Justin is handling very small initiatives that don't have a complex stakeholder group. Ingrid, on the other hand, might have a number of different stakeholders, and she might be facing some of the challenges of stakeholders not agreeing on some of the stuff based on their asks. That's one major difference. Another major difference between these two answers is the fact that Ingrid doesn't necessarily just talk about clarifying the requirements. She's now starting to talk about detailing them out to a level of detail that the technical team actually need, right? Justin might not necessarily even understand that that's part of the role, right? As somebody who may be in the profession for 6 months or a year, they might not have had enough exposure to understand that that's the way that Ingrid kind of sees her role, right? This is all kind of internal thinking that Ingrid has that Justin might not be exposed to. So he might not even know that it's really an expectation on somebody like Ingrid, right? Hope all of this is making sense. Now, if I was to ask somebody like Shauna what her job as an analyst is, I would probably get an answer that looks something like this, right? Shauna would come in and she would give me an answer that is significantly different than the answer that I'd be getting from Justin. So she would probably say something along the lines of, my job is to help my stakeholders figure out what the right solution is, and then to help the team implement. Seems much more simple than some of the other answers. But what we'll see in a second is that Shauna actually has a much more sophisticated understanding of what her job is. And she actually has quite a broader understanding of what her job is. Because when you ask somebody like a Justin and Ingrid, what they're essentially doing is that they are focusing very, very heavily on one portion of a solution, right? And this is normal. Again, as a starting business analyst or somebody who's even at the intermediate level, your focus on what your job actually is all about may be on the actual product or on the actual technical aspects of a solution. And that's perfectly fine. But for you to be able to elevate yourself up to somebody like Shauna's level, you can't afford to just look at things from a product point of view, right? Because you can see that whereas Justin and Ingrid are really focused on the software features, they're maybe looking at the data elements, they may or may not be even thinking about system interfaces. Shauna is much broader than that, right? Shauna's point of view on this is that, yeah, I think about the product, right? But there is this huge other non-product aspect to the solution. So Shauna's thinking about this in a much more holistic way, because her opinion is that my job isn't just to deliver a piece of software. My job is to help my customers. Again, if I was to go back to Shauna's answer, right, you could see that she says, I help my stakeholders determine the right solution. She's not talking about systems, right? She's saying I need to deliver the right solution. And then I need to help the rest of the team implement it. And the focus there, again, is on a holistic solution, and the responsibility that Shauna is taking is much broader than somebody like an Ingrid or somebody like a Justin. Okay. Is all of what I'm saying so far making sense? You just give me a thumbs up, and we'll and I'll know that I'm not losing anybody. I would just want to make sure everybody here is with me, because this part of the introduction really kind of just sets the stage for understanding Shauna's mindset in a much more clear way. Okay, so let me just quickly make a quick adjustment to that. Hopefully this is all coming through. But let's start to get a clearer idea of how Shauna sees her world, right? Because if you were to kind of start to peer into the mind of somebody like Shauna, what you would see is that she understands the solution as both a non-technical and a technical piece working together to make sure that there's a holistic solution that's in place. But Shauna also has quite a bit more insight into the world that goes kind of above and beyond just that solution, right? She might not necessarily take part in all of the project activities or all the activities across this entire life cycle, but she understands her job as a solution, and she understands exactly where that solution fits within the broader context. In that broader context, it has to do with the fact that she knows that her company usually goes through some sort of a funding process, right? Company goes through some sort of a funding process to figure out whether it is worthwhile for the company to fund a project. And the purpose of that project is to deliver a solution, right? This is the mindset of somebody like a Shauna, right? Again, with experience and the frameworks will come into the picture in just 1 second, right? But hopefully you're starting to understand the broader mindset here, right? So she understands that the company is funding a project. That project is delivering a holistic solution, and that holistic solution is going to be helping the company evolve into the next stage of its evolution, right? The whole reason why our careers as business analysts exist, if you look at it at a very broad level, which Shauna does, is that we're not here to write specs. We're not here to write requirements. We're not, right? As a more senior analyst, the purpose of your existence as an analyst is to help your company figure out how it needs to evolve over time. And this is the process by which a company goes through those stages of evolution. And so essentially, Shauna has this bigger picture in her mind. She understands that her company is constantly trying to figure out how to allocate their funds to different projects so that they can have solutions to the existing challenges that they have and solutions to help them take advantage of certain opportunities that might exist within their space, right? So she understands this broader context, and this will come in to this, we'll come back to this in a couple of minutes so that you can understand how this broader understanding actually informs her and gives her the capability to deliver a lot more value for her employer or for her clients. Okay, so that's her view. Now, if we were to look again, peer inside the mind of somebody like Ashana, you would see that the concept of the P3 framework that I'm going to talk to you about has to do with the solution. Very specifically, has to do with the solution element of this. All right. There are other frameworks that I've put together that are much more advanced that kind of broaden themselves and talk a little bit more about on the project side of things and really much more on the company side of things so that you can start to understand the project and the company spaces a lot better. But the P3 framework focuses specifically on helping analysts understand solutions. Okay, and that the three basic elements, and part of the reason why it's called the P3 framework is because it has 3 Ps, right? People, processes, and product. And so in Shauna's mind, when she thinks about a solution, again, she's going back and saying there is a whole dynamic within this organization of people, relationships. There are people who have vested interests. There are people who have priorities. And she understands that landscape very well, and she knows how to navigate the people landscape, right? And that becomes part of her solutioning, right? She starts to take a lot of those things into account when she's doing her solutioning. Second piece is the process, right? She knows that if she just delivers a piece of software without thinking about how the business is actually going to be functioning, there is somewhat of a high risk that that product isn't actually going to support the business in the way that it needs to because that solution has essentially ignored the process part of the solutioning environment. Okay. Looking into this P3 framework in a lot more detail, you'll see that there are actually a number of different layers that Shauna has to think across, right? It's not just people, process, and product. The people and processes are the top 2 layers of the way that an analyst should be thinking, right? So at the very top, you see there's a very green one here where it is listed as people, and we've said stakeholders, and I'll dive into a little bit more detail into each of these in a couple of minutes, but we have a set of stakeholders, and we need to make sure that we understand stakeholders. The BA BOK will tell you have to perform stakeholder analysis, very legitimate. You have to do stakeholder management, very legitimate. What does that actually mean? We'll talk about it in a second. The second layer here has to do with business design, and I've intentionally not called that layer just business processes, right? You see business processes here, but business design can include more than just process design. But from an analyst point of view who is trying to figure out how to add the most value, processes are the main thing to focus on. Okay. It's only when you've really kind of gotten a clear idea of those 2 layers where you can actually then start to get a realistic picture of what the product is going to is supposed to start looking like. And again, in the mind of somebody like Ashana, she doesn't just see a piece of software as just one big monolithic piece of technology, right? She understands that every piece of enterprise software breaks down into at least 4 different major areas of development and design. And those 4 layers are laid out for you in the model here, right? You have the user interface layer, and many junior analysts tend to focus very heavily on this because it's the most visible and it's the easiest to understand. But for analysts who start to now get a little bit more sophisticated and want to add more value to the team overall, they start to get deeper and deeper into the application logic layer, the database layer, and sometimes even the system interface layer. Okay, some of the concerns that somebody like Shauna would have at each of these layers, right, have to do with stakeholders. Stakeholder analysis, oftentimes I find it is taught in a way where essentially what an analyst is trying to do is to try to fill out a template that puts names besides certain roles, right? So a template might ask you, who is the project sponsor? Who is the customer? Who is the subject matter expert? And it tends to get treated in a very clinical way like that, whereas stakeholder analysis is actually a much more deeper and much more involved activity than just that, because you have to understand not only who the people are, but you have to figure out, how am I going to bring these folks to the table? How am I going to secure their time? Especially when you start to deal with much more senior folks in the organization, these things start to become way more challenges, because a lot of times, even though somebody is on your stakeholder group, they might not give you the time of day, right? And when you start to get a little bit more senior and your projects start to get bigger, these become real challenges. How do I actually keep a person's attention, right? And things get a little bit higher. How do I understand where, so for example, if you were to think about a much more senior stakeholder that you're going to have into your workshop, what do you know about their priorities? Where are the conflicts in the organization? A lot of these types of questions typically don't get answered on a template, right? But from Shauna's point of view, she understands that these are all issues, and she has the mental processes in place to figure out exactly how to arrive at the right answers for these things, okay? And getting this part of it wrong can have disastrous effects for a project, all right? Business design, very much a similar kind of attitude towards it, right? When it comes to business design, you have to really have a clear idea of some of the subject matter, right? If you're an analyst, I as a general analyst have to put in a lot of work to understand exactly what this business is about and get myself ramped up very quickly before I can understand exactly how I'm going to help them. I can't do any business design unless I understand that, right? So it requires a little bit of domain knowledge, requires understanding of how to actually help your customers build better business processes, okay? If you were to look at many of the other layers, and I won't go through all of these in detail, but again, each one of these different layers has a different set of concerns that needs to be in the back of a mind of an analyst, okay? A senior analyst. And anytime you're getting engaged on a project, you can't go in blind. You can't just go in thinking about what is it that my customers want, because you understand your role to be much more holistic than that, right? If you want to deliver a full solution, you need to understand the different elements of that solution and exactly which stakeholders require which piece. Because when you get into the product side of things, especially when your projects get bigger, you might have a team of 10 different developers. Some developers are not going to care about what's going on the UI side, right? Other developers are not going to care about what the database looks like. And your understanding of how to ask the right questions, get to the right solution, and document that for the right folks on the team now becomes a critical skill when your projects start to scale up a little bit more, right? And so the reason why I've designed this framework that I have is because it's the right level of detail. As I said earlier, if I was to neglect any of these layers, right? And to those of you that this might seem a little bit more complex, if there are layers of this that don't get addressed, then there's something that's going to be falling through the cracks, right? We don't need to get too much more detailed than this, but this is the way that somebody like Ashana thinks. Now, to kind of illustrate the point a little bit more, let's take a look at how somebody like a Justin would try to pick up the skills, right? A lot of folks who read the BA book and are trying to do any of their IIBA certifications may start to look at the BA book to try to figure out, okay, in this sea of tools and techniques that are available to me, which ones should I be using? That's a very common question that comes up. And somebody like a Justin might take a look at the BA book and start reading it from beginning to end as a way of trying to learn how to become a business analyst. And that is not a good strategy, right? Not a good strategy, because the way I equate reading the BA book to learn business analysis is trying to learn a new language just by flipping through the dictionary from beginning to the end, right? That's not the most effective way of learning a new language. I know, because I'm trying to learn a little bit of Spanish right now. Being in Argentina, I wouldn't open up the Spanish dictionary and start trying to learn the language from there. But I do see a lot of analysts who just, try to grind through the BA book and say, okay, well, I'm trying to become a good analyst, so I'm going to do that. That's not the way to do it, right? The BA book gives you a tool set. It doesn't necessarily tell you which tool set is more superior to another one given a certain situation. And for you to try to memorize the entire dictionary is going to leave you exhausted probably, and not nearly at the level that you want to be at, right? But again, somebody like a Justin might approach it that way unless they have better guidance, if that makes sense. Now, somebody like Ashana is a little bit more sophisticated, as we said earlier, right? Ashana would say, you know what? I have my tool set. I've been reading the BA book for a long time. I've read all the previous versions and I know what tool set is available, but I'm not going to try to learn everything that's in the BA book. My goal, based on the framework that I have, knowing that there are certain sets of concerns, I'm going to choose the tool set that works the best given my skills and given the environment that I'm in, right? And knowing and understanding that there's a broader world out there for her to deal with, somebody like Ashana would essentially start to build her own toolbox, knowing when and where these tools are going to be useful for her. And she can start to ignore a lot of the other tool sets that exist, so that she's not burdened with having to learn everything, number one. But number two, the other major benefit of approaching this like Ashana is that anytime there's a new tool that's available to you, you can quickly look back into your mental model and say, okay, this tool helps me do what? Does it help me mock up the user interface level? Does it help me get a better handle on the database structure or anything that's data related? Is it helping me to document the business rules at the application logic level? What is it doing, right? And having this framework in the back of your mind makes it much easier for you to start to understand where new tools may or may not help you. And you can very quickly discard something if you don't need to. And I can give you a perfect example of this in my own career, where around 2017, 2018, I started to get a lot of questions around user stories. And for a couple of months, I couldn't understand why everybody was so obsessed with user stories, right? And I eventually found out why, and I can share that with you later on. But when user stories popped up as a very popular thing that people should be focusing on, I just very simply thought back. Do I have any tools that help me model the user interaction layer of a solution? The answer was yes, right? That answer was a combination of fully dressed use cases and wireframes. And between those two tools, this user interface layer, I can describe that layer of a solution with a great level of detail if needed, using just use cases and mockups. And so in my mind, the whole idea of user stories, I just discarded it, right? I can still produce them because they're much lighter forms of use cases, but I didn't expend a lot of my mental effort trying to figure out what is a user story? How do I write a proper user story? I said, you know what? There are tools that work very well for me in that space, and I can afford to just park the concept of user stories and dedicate my time somewhere else. Without a mental model like that, it would have been very hard for me to figure out which aspects of my current tool set I would have to replace if I'm going to adopt user stories, right? Hopefully that makes sense, because in the mind of somebody like Ashana, having a mental model like this to understand how to describe solutions well has that benefit, but it also has the benefit for how she's going to allocate her resources. Is she going to take a new course now on user stories just because everybody's talking about it? Absolutely not, right? She understands that she can deliver her solutions with the existing tool set, And if her employer or her clients in the future say, hey, we want you to do it user story format, then she'll invest the time, right? Very quickly learn it based using a lot of the other things that she knows, and then she'll start applying those skills automatically. Okay. The point really I'm trying to get across here is that when you look at the three different folks that we have that are operating, right? At first, it might be hard to really pin down what somebody like a Justin is missing, right? Somebody like a Justin, as a junior analyst, there's a very high likelihood that they're going to be writing possibly user stories, and they're doing a lot of mock-ups. And they may not be doing a whole lot else. But as an analyst at that level, again, it's good for somebody at that level, right? But as you start to mature in the profession, one of the ways that you can get a little bit of direction on what you need to learn is to just have this image in the back of your mind and figure out how you can broaden the amount of the solution that you're concerning yourself with on a day-to-day basis, right? So if you're a junior analyst like Justin, you probably have no idea how to help your customers do process design. If you're somebody like Ingrid, you might have some idea on how to do that. You might not be the best at it, but you have some idea of how to do some process mapping, just enough to get your customers to a place where they need to be so that you can help them do some solutioning. If you're somebody like Ashana, chances are you've completely mastered process design. And not only are you mapping processes, but you're actively helping your customers make decisions about how to sequence their activities. Does it make sense to do that, right? You can start to give that kind of advisory services to your customers when you reach a certain point and you start to master that skill set. But as a mental model, this tool helps you to really understand what you should be concerned with. Okay. So I've talked quite a bit here, but I just want to make sure that I want to be clear about what the value of a mental model is. And what we can do here, this is essentially all I wanted to talk about in terms of what frameworks and mental models are, but I have quite a bit more detail that I can go into. We'll do a quick time check here. It looks like we're at 2:08 already, so it seems like we're actually quite close to our 15-minute mark here. I'll switch gears for about 5 minutes or so, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the other valuable decisions you can start to make when you start to adopt these types of mental models. And then what we'll do is I'll take some questions. So if you have your questions, please start putting them in the chat right now, and I'll go through and I'll start answering some of the questions that we have. What I have here in the Visio diagram that you have in front of you is essentially that P3 framework kind of broken out. Okay, people, process, product. If you can just memorize that, you now at least have a clear understanding of a little bit of a broader view of the solution. Now, if we were to look at some of the tools that exist at each of these different stages, you can start to see that at each of these different layers, there are certain things that you can start to do, right? If you are not as strong on the business process front, what you want to start learning how to do is future state process design and mapping. And that's a skill set that you should put on your development plan and say, I want to start broadening myself. I want to start adding more value to the projects that I work on. And that skill set now helps you to kind of elevate yourself much more into the world of your customers. Okay. I do see your questions. I will answer that, and I'll start answering those in about 5 minutes. Okay. So hopefully you can start to see that each of these layers, what will essentially happen, just like we saw in Shauna's world here. Let me switch back over to that. Like we saw in Shauna's world here, you can now start to make much more sense of the purpose of the tools. And you can start to say, okay, if I'm going to try to elevate myself even further than Shauna and start doing business cases, what kind of tools do I need, right? And your mental models will help you make those decisions on the fly. and you won't have to go back to the BA box to figure things out, or you won't have to really kind of do a lot of digging in your own notes once you've kind of internalized the decision-making framework, or the framework that is going to help you to understand your reality and make these kinds of decisions. Okay, the other piece of, right, so let's take a quick look at some of the tools that could be available to you. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. I am working on building an exhaustive list based on what the BA box says and what some of the other standard organizations are, so that you can start to understand what tools are available to you, so you don't have to, for example, if you've already learned how to do use cases, you don't need to duplicate that effort and learn user stories as well. You're already covered for that department, right? Focus on something else so that you're getting a lot more value for the time that you're investing. If you look at the interface level, the user interface level, right? Use cases and user stories again, but then you have mockups, and then there are specific formats of how to actually do screen specifications to bring things down to even a lower level of detail at the user interface kind of layer of the solution. The application logic level, business rules, there's many different formats that you can use to produce your business rules, but things like permissions matrices are critical for systems that have complex security requirements and complex authorization requirements. You need to learn to produce a tool like that so that you're adequately capturing those aspects of the solution. Okay, won't get down to the system interface level. There's, at the database level, you probably already know of entity models. You may not have heard of something called object models, which is my preference, but entity models exist. There are a lot of other tools at that level that kind of exist. So hopefully you can start to see what it is that a framework like this can do for you, right? Once you've learned the different layers and you see what tools are in your toolbox to start describing each of these layers, it makes your job of expressing the business needs and the functional needs of the solution a little bit easier. The decisions are already made based on this framework, and now you just need to learn how to produce the outputs. One of the other things that I was going to get into with the 2 minutes left is that once you start to gain a knowledge like this, it kind of can act as a stepping stone for you to actually make even more sophisticated decisions for your employer. So some business analysts out there work on off-the-shelf products. Other business analysts work on custom products. Other analysts work on both, right? If you don't understand the fundamental difference between these different types of products, you may get confused and start producing entity models for something where an entity model is just not even possible or of really any real value, right? So for example, if you were to look at a software product like SAP's HR system, for example, if you're an analyst working on a project that's looking to implement SAP's SuccessFactors HR, and you started producing entity models, that entity model has little to no value to the project, because there's nothing that they can do with a product like that at the database level. Okay, but this gets a little bit more sophisticated, but I'm hoping you'll understand kind of the thinking behind more advanced analysis. The expectation isn't for you to be able to, again, internalize this right away and understand it right away. Just start thinking along these lines and start to kind of understand that there are different layers. And as an analyst, you have tools available to you at each of the different layers. All right. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I am going to scan through the questions to see if we have any questions that have popped up for us as I was doing the talking. I do see some questions coming out from our YouTube channel here. So how to get access to top level stakeholders? That's an excellent question. Now, getting access to stakeholders can work in one of two ways. All right, let's take a look at it from the perspectives of two different people that we may be dealing with here, right? If I was Justin, the junior analyst, I would probably have no hope of getting access to a senior stakeholder because I don't have I don't have the ability to actually speak to them at their level, which is usually a much broader level than a lot of my customers will talk at. And even if I do get their attention, it's very likely that I'm not gonna be able to do much with the interactions that I have with them. Okay. If I'm at Ingrid's level, then I could start to say, you know what, I think I've had some conversations with some of the operational folks here. I think I need to speak to the VP just to make sure that I can kind of understand their vision. And if you're somebody in Ingrid's position as an intermediate analyst with, let's say, with 5 to 7 years of experience, hopefully your project managers are starting to invite you, and your managers and your own directors are starting to invite you to some of those senior conversations that are happening. But if not, you can ask, right? And your ask isn't, hey, can I speak to this person? You might, as Ingrid, go to your project manager or to your own manager and say, hey, look, I feel like I'm missing a piece of the picture here. And I think that piece of the picture really rests with this person. Do you think it's possible for us to be able to get this person on a 10-minute phone call? Or do you think we can get them in a 10-minute, just in a meeting where I can ask a few of the questions just so we have a clearer sense, right? You can start to pursue and start to get time with more senior folks if you express your concerns in the right way to the right people, and that'll start opening some doors for you. Now, if you choose to go down that path, I would say that you have to be very careful, because once you get somebody's time, you have to make sure you respect that time, right? If somebody very senior in the organization decides to give you 30 minutes of their time, you better have done a ton of homework before you show up to that conversation. Because if you walk into that conversation and they're seeing that there's not much value for them as part of that conversation, the door for you to have conversations with other senior members may be closed, right? Because you've had your chance, and I think a very senior person has seen that, you know what, it's better if I just speak to your manager or to the project manager or to somebody else, because that's where I'll get more value for my time, right? That's how a lot of senior folks think. And so it's an excellent way for you to start to get access to that. If you're somebody at Shauna's level, chances are you have interactions with a lot of senior folks to begin with, right? And they're probably reaching out to you. There might be the vice president of sales that reaches out to you and says, hey, Shauna, I remember you worked on this other project. You got a couple of minutes? I want to tell you about some of the stuff that's going on in our organization. And Shauna would say, you know what? I'm not on that project, but I have 10 minutes. I have 20 minutes. I can talk, right? Somebody at Shauna's level typically will have a lot of those types of interactions, or they'll be invited into a meeting by the project manager or by the director of the group, who will say, you know what, this is Shauna, our very senior person. And then Shauna basically just carries on the conversation with a more senior person. So hopefully that answers answers your question there. We have a couple of more questions. I'm just going to take a quick scroll to the top to make sure I'm not missing any major questions here. So, okay, we can hear and see you. Yep. All right. Great. Thank you. Is it due to football fever? No, I'm not. I didn't know that the World Cup was on when I came to Argentina, Raul. So I'll click on that. So I came down here, then I realized that, and I was actually here when they won the World Cup. It was a great time. It was a great time. So now, yes. Okay. So let me quickly scroll down and see if we have some questions here. We got some folks coming in from Romania. We got some folks coming in from Atlanta, Georgia, folks from Nigeria. Thank you all for joining. Indeed, a holistic view. Thank you for that, Eric. That's right. Remain sustainably competitive. That's a really great point, Kingsley, because sustainably competitive essentially means, and especially in this new world where we now have a lot of AI tools at our disposal, remaining competitive in this world is going to be a little bit different than remaining competitive in the previous world. And if you haven't seen, what I'm going to do is I'll share a couple of videos that if you haven't yet seen some of the work that our community members and I have been doing around using ChatGPT for business analysis, I'll share a couple of links in the chat here for you to actually start to get a clearer idea of what some of these tools can do for you. And this goes back to Kingsley's point about but remaining sustainably competitive, right? Remaining sustainably competitive is going to mean increasingly that you're going to have to become a much better thinker as an analyst, less of a doer, because the AI tools are going to be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. We now need to figure out how to ask it the right questions. And for us to do that, we better have our mental models very clear. Okay. How to get access to top level? I think we answered that. I said, I'm working on a company's operational dashboard, which the company uses to map people to, let me just put this comment up so everybody can see it, to projects and handle around 5,000 people. I need buy-in from the CFO and the CHRO to streamline process issues, but how? So depends on what I said earlier about how to get these folks onto to the table is that applies. What I would do if I were you is to really very clearly identify what the issue is that you're trying to solve, possibly come up with some mock-ups or a proof of concept of something if your company is willing to invest in something like that, and then try to secure somebody's time to say, hey, look, Mr. or Mrs. CFO, we've had this ongoing issue where we're not able to get a very clear view of our operations. I believe that we have a solution that may work for this, right? And if your project isn't funded yet, that may be the beginning of them wanting to fund a project like this. But to do it on your own as an analyst, especially if you're a junior level, it's probably not possible, right? So it depends. I don't know what I don't know what level you're at, but I'm assuming you're at the intermediate level or possibly even at a very senior level, and you can take that approach. Denise asks, Mel, could you please recommend any other tools or workshops to help growing and improving the senior BA mindset and approach? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a ton of conversations like this inside of our community. That's one option for you. Our YouTube channel is full of materials where I'm constantly trying to encourage people to think a little bit differently about their profession. So those are two options I can think of right off of the bat. I have a lot more materials that will be publishing there. Hopefully that's of help, Denise. If not, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you have any specific questions, and I can answer those for you. Kingsley says, it would appear that the P3 framework still requires the experience of a BA to determine how to work it. In essence, it is not prescriptive. Would this be correct? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm actually glad you said that, because let me show you the attitude, right? I'll pull up my LinkedIn profile here, and I'll show you something that I published yesterday, I believe it was, that should kind of explain to you what I mean by this framework, right? The title of this little slide deck that I put up there is that the whole title of this is really around the power of thinking like a business analyst. There is nothing that's prescriptive about ways of thinking. And that aspect of it is what actually brings it a lot of value, right? So let me quickly walk you through this. I said, you know what? Thinking greater than templates. I've used a ton of templates in my life. Well, I wouldn't say used. I've run across many templates. I can think of very few templates that have actually been of any real value to me when it comes to learning. And so learning how to think is the super skill for the future. And it's much bigger than templates. And I said that if you learn to think like an analyst, you're never going to need another template in your life. Why? Right? Because these types of frameworks that I talk about, they promote a way of thinking. And what a template tries to do is that it tries to kind of box you in and tell you what it is that you should be producing. And that template that you get might work for you in one specific scenario. The likelihood of that thing actually working for you throughout your entire career is very low. And that's been my experience with templates. And a lot of people have asked me for templates. I just simply outright refuse to provide them, because my goal isn't to teach you how to do one quick job or help you get over one hurdle. I'm trying to solve the bigger challenge of helping you learn how to think like an analyst, so that you don't need me or templates or anything else, that you can become a little bit more self-sufficient. The frameworks make you agile and reflexive. And this is the point that we're getting at here, right? Because when you think in terms of templates, you start to say, okay, you know what? I have a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. Where do I nail? And you never want to get, as an analyst, you never want to get yourself in a mindset like that. As a professional, you never want to get in that mindset, because that is a surefire way to make yourself outdated in the competitive landscape very quickly. Frameworks say enterprise systems have a certain nature to them. That nature isn't going to change regardless of what the tools and techniques are. New AI tool like ChatGPT pops out, I don't get scared and start worrying about my career. I say, wow, how much of the heavy lifting that I do can I offload onto this tool so that I can start thinking in even about more advanced subjects, right? I got it to write some user stories for me. Let me share this video in the chat, and you can actually watch us going through here. And I'll share this one more here, right here, and you'll see that I just shared a YouTube video in the chat where you can actually watch me. It's like a 1 hour, 40-minute or 1 hour session. I actually offload a lot of my user story writing onto ChatGPT. And then I'm like, well, I now have a lot more mental space left over to do more complicated work. The third piece of this that I kind of published here is that I said that frameworks actually make you way more creative, because they give you enough structure to think about what you need to be producing, but it's not prescriptive, and it says, okay, I know how to cover my bases. Now, how do I create a good solution knowing that I have this basic structure? Instead of frantically running around trying to figure out whether you've done everything the way you're supposed to, that problem kind of gets solved with the framework. And now you can start to think a little bit more clearly about and creatively about solutions that you want to deliver. Okay. So that's something I shared, and that touches specifically on that point, Kingsley. Thank you for sharing that. We have, let's see here, hello from England, UK. Welcome, Niraj. We have the Kingsley also asks, would you consider some form of iteration in the future development of the P3 framework to provide some context guidance to users? Absolutely. So the P3 framework, I've been building this up and refining it over the last, well, in the back of my mind, I've been building it up over the last 17 years that I've been doing this. But as something that I put out to other folks to learn from, I've been refining it for about 6 years now, ever since around 2016, 2017. So it's constantly going new iterations to make sure that it's a framework that continues to work in the future. So the answer to that is absolutely yes. Thank you for your excellent informative session. Thank you for taking the time to attend. I've talked quite a bit here. We're at 28 minutes after. I'll keep an eye out to see if we have any other questions. And in the meantime, while waiting, I will tell you that I'll share a couple more links of stuff that might be helpful for you, okay? There is, if you're interested in learning more about Justin, Ingrid, and Shauna, these are the 3 folks that our members met earlier. And I'll just share this link with you. Watch this video and get an idea of how each of them respond to Peter, the project manager, all right? So Peter, the project manager, is constantly coming in and making very unreasonable demands of all 3 of these analysts. And in the video that I shared, kind of gives you a bit of a window into how each of these different folks respond. And you'll start to see how Ingrid is actually quite a bit more sophisticated in her approach to dealing with Peter, the project manager, than Justin is, right? Justin just does whatever he's told, and he kind of gets himself into trouble, whereas Ingrid's a little bit smarter. Shauna, we haven't looked at yet. We're going to do that in our next live session, where I'm going to explain to folks how Shauna is even more sophisticated in her approach to dealing with her stakeholders, her project manager, Peter, the project manager, and she knows exactly how to play that game really well, right? So that's one video I'll share with you. Let's see if it is, I think I might have shared the wrong one here. So I'll share this one as well. Let's just make sure that this one is also in there. So that you have that. Again, if you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, feel free to check out my profile and connect with me. We also have another live session that I've already scheduled for next week. So if you're interested in joining me again, next week, I'm going to be talking a little bit more about BA training programs. And I've set out a set of principles that I think a BA training program should have. And I want to talk to you about that because I think there's a huge risk of you spending your money on something that's not going to give you the results that you're looking for. And there's a lot of BA training programs out there. Next week, I'm going to talk to you about certain characteristics that our training program should have. And if you believe that those are the good principles, then go out into the market and look for those principles in all BA training programs. And make sure you're spending your time and your money on things that are actually gonna help you. Okay, so I want to lay out a set of principles, and I'll share that one here. That is our next live session. I believe that link is also in the comments, and I'll make another comment to this live session. I'll add all of these links in for anybody who wasn't able to make it to the chat. But I think I'm a minute past my time here. I don't see any other questions. Let me just quickly run up and down the list here to see if we have any other questions. And for anybody who needs to drop off, feel free to do so. I'll stick around for a couple of more minutes here to address a couple of the other comments that we have. So it says LinkedIn user here, doesn't tell me who it is, but it says, the comment says many BA business consultants tend to, in my opinion, oversimplify BA work. And that's right. Oversimplify BA work and the stark contract of the activities based on the type of the project. Your framework simplifies a complex BA process in such a way that a BA can perform their role properly. Improper BA work can be very costly to an organization. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe in a future session, I'll talk about the actual impacts of doing low quality business analysis work, because I think I see some companies, and this isn't really on business analysts, and it's not meant to be a judgment on anyone, but some companies who have to cut corners oftentimes use the business analysis part of the project on where to cut. And they do so, and if they do it in an unwise way, that actually creates more costs for them. And I can demonstrate that with a couple of examples of how cutting corners in the wrong place in the business analysis space can completely blow up your project. All right, because a lot of what business analysts do, the impact of that magnifies when it goes downstream, right? So bad analysis work, if you solve it very early on, you can save yourself a lot of money. But if low quality analysis work goes downstream, the cost of that now gets much bigger. It amplifies in very huge ways because there are a lot more people involved now. All right. Vijay says, I'm a recruiter with 10 years of experience who wants to become a BA but not sure where to begin. Please guide me. Shoot me a message over LinkedIn, Vijay, and I'll provide you some resources that can kind of give you an idea. Denise says, well-structured ideas. Thank you very much, Denise. You're very welcome as well. Great session, very impactful. I'm really glad, because I sometimes worry about when I'm talking about things like this, I don't want things to be too abstract. I want to kind of give you a window into the mind of somebody who's much more senior without making them inaccessible. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can feel free to reach out to me and ask your questions, and I'll try to put that in a future live session. Next week, let's talk about BA training programs and what good quality BA training programs should have and what you should be looking for when you're trying to shop around for a program like that. All right. I'll leave this here. I want to thank you all for attending. This is great. I love doing live sessions. And again, I do a ton of live sessions inside of our community. If you haven't seen our community, I'll put one last link into the chat here. And you can think about whether you want to join us. I didn't save this one here. I didn't think to share this one. So I'll just quickly go to the website here and pull out the link, and I'll share it with you. And if you're thinking about getting more involved, we do live sessions on a regular basis. One of the videos that I shared on our YouTube channel was actually done inside of our community live, where we explored ChatGPT. So take a look at that as well. Divya, I will take your question here, and I will answer this one in the next one. I do have to actually run. I have another appointment coming up, but I'll park this one. And I'll make sure that we address this in a future live session. So Thank you everybody for attending. We'll cut this one off here, and I hopefully will be able to see you on the next one. And I'll flash a couple of these other questions so I can answer them in the next one. How can I internalize this framework? Yeah, I'm sorry, we're getting so many good questions. Demystified. Okay, great. Thank you all. I'll cut it off here. I'll address the questions that you have in our next live session. And I hope to see you there. Take care, everyone.